You're watching Personal Finance with Coach Kelvin. Let's get into the video.
Hey guys, Coach Kelvin here, and today I want to talk to you about emergency funds. Now, when you basically are looking to achieve financial independence, it's important to start putting some money aside, which we leave as a cash asset. Now, by keeping some cash aside, this is going to allow us to cover any of those day-to-day expenses that may pop up without needing to redraw down from our asset portfolio. So your emergency fund is essentially what we're keeping in an extra account or maybe another vehicle that we can access at any time. It's usable to cover any of those black swan event bills, like if your car was to get crashed, medical emergency comes up, you need to travel to see family or something all of a sudden. This is where we pull those funds from. Obviously, our normal day-to-day expenses such as your groceries, rent, internet, water, gas, all of that is covered by your general living expenses. But anything that's out of the ordinary, we hit it hard with that emergency fund. Now, there are a few ways and a few methodologies that people have or believe to use when they are creating their emergency fund. So if you do a Google search online, you'll pretty much find that everyone recommends between 3 to 6 months of living expenses covered. Now, depending on your situation, I think that 6 months could even be a little too excessive, because that could be money that you are receiving a return on if required. So if we look at the position of perhaps someone who has no debt to their name, they are renting a property, and therefore they have no real liabilities, what's going to happen is the likelihood of them getting a very emergency expense that pops up and cripples them is quite low. Now, with this particular individual in this hypothetical scenario, if we actually look at what expenses that are recurring, so your rent, groceries, living expenses, outside of that your car, internet, water, phone, gas, etc., they're very unlikely to need to draw on 3 months worth of living expenses straight away. So there's really no need to put so much money aside for this individual. So what may be a better strategy is to simply have a high interest savings account where we park 4 weeks, maybe to 6 weeks worth of living expenses into that. But on all the other money that we accumulate, we have it invested so that we're earning a return on it. Now, we'll still be earning a return on that high interest savings account. It's just at the moment extremely low. I think anything past 6 weeks for an emergency fund, if you have zero debt to your name, you're employed in a full-time job, and you're starting to accrue some of the benefits of that, such as sick leave, annual leave, RDOs, etc., that's going to be enough to get you by. Now, when we talk emergency funds, people are tending to think that this is always a cash asset. When you have full-time employment, they often will deduct money from your pay every week or from your salary. And this can be accumulated as rostered days off for some companies, but you will also accrue annual leave. This is especially true here in Australia. So what happens is we build up our annual leave and our rostered days off entitlement over time, and sick pay as well for those who receive it. Now, this is all technically funds that we can use to take ourselves away from work. So if a medical expense comes up, you can utilize those sick days. And yes, you may need to give your employer a doctor's certificate, but then we also have access to our annual leave, our rostered days off, where we can fill in the gaps there. This is going to allow you to still receive your general income based on your 38-hour work week, etc. It's going to allow you to still receive that same income week to week, even while you're not there. Now, we can only really draw down on what we have accumulated. So if you've worked at the business for a long time and not used everything that you accumulate every year, you're going to have a bit of a safety buffer here. Now, this actually does count as an emergency fund because it's available to use and to deploy essentially if we require it. Now, during your standard employments, you're actually able to have your annual leave cashed out. You just speak to the payroll officer at your place of employment, and you can have this done at any time. Now, typically the way this occurs is you get a lump sum payment of however many hours it is that you have requested to be paid out. That will just be tacked onto the end of your normal pay slip. So your working week paid out annual leave, and you'll just receive a big lump sum. Because we receive that big lump sum, we'll have a larger portion of income tax deducted from us, but this can offset some of the tax that we actually are required to pay later on, and you should see that balance out when you lodge your tax return at the end of financial year. So the annual leave is essentially a forced savings account which you earn nothing on, but you can actually draw down on it or deploy it back to you anytime that you require it, if you do not choose to take it as paid holidays. So this is actually one venue that we can utilize our emergency fund, or one vessel to have it in. Now, for those of you who have a high interest savings account, it's obviously a great place to put it in because it's very liquid. We can access it as well. And with certain banks, we can earn a fairly decent interest rate on our high interest savings account. So if you see my last video where I spoke about the best places to earn a return on your first $1,000 that you've saved, I cover a few of the bank account benefits there. The next place we can store our emergency fund would be in our offset account, which is attached to our loan. Now, with your offset account, this is basically a fantastic vessel because by us putting that money as a write-off against the remaining loan balance of your house, you're able to reduce your interest commitments to that loan. So I'm going to use a very simple example here, and I know I've talked about this before, but it's a brilliant vessel. So if I have a $300,000 loan, okay, and into my offset, I place $10,000, and let's say my interest rate is 2.5%, okay? So that $10,000 that I have placed into my loan or my offset account to offset the loan, that's going to bring my loan down to $290,000. Now, on the earnings I'm going to make or not have to pay on that interest, is actually going to work out to save me around $250 a year. Now, I look at this as a 2.5% return. However, because you're technically just reducing an expense and not actually earning more money, you do not need to pay income tax on any earnings or savings in your offset account, okay? So that's why it's so brilliant, because instead of us receiving a bit of money and then that increases our tax obligation come the end of financial year because we have earned interest, we're essentially doing the opposite and we're saving interest, okay? And this is what makes an offset account an extremely effective place to store your emergency fund. Now, I know a lot of people like to have credit cards, and this can essentially cover some of those emergency expenses. However, I only recommend using this if you actually have a very regular and consistent income stream, which you can use to pay down that credit card if you do tend to utilize one. So let's say you invest 90% of your money every single week and you're left with just a small cash buffer, but an emergency pops up that requires you to spend a little more. This could mean you need to replace a car, or you have to all of a sudden replace a air conditioner in your rental property or something. Believe me, it happens. Now, if you have this expenditure pop up and you do not have the savings to afford it, we can place the remaining balance onto our credit card. Now, this can be used as an emergency fund, which we can simply quickly utilize it and then pay it down with our next paycheck that comes in. Obviously, there is inherent risk with doing so, because anytime we miss our minimum repayment or even our interest rolls over into the following month, we're going to then owe money. We're going to pay a big interest bill. And if you don't even pay your minimum amount, then you're going to end up with a fee also. So credit cards are extremely high risk, and I recommend, if you have one, always keep the balance paid at zero, but you can set it aside as a type of emergency fund just for those really, really rare occasions where your savings may not be able to cover what it is you have. And then simply when you receive that bill or you have to pay for that expense, you do so on the credit card, you earn whatever rewards you get. It might be Qantas points or cashback, and then you simply just pay it off with your next paycheck. If you are full-time, you can also utilize some of that annual leave to then pay it down in the next pay cycle when you receive your money. So this is an effective way, but also a riskier way to have an emergency fund, okay? Now, If you are somebody that does have home loans and you have an offset account attached to each of those home loans, this is a good place to split some of your emergency funds up. So for myself, I like to keep about $5,000 in cash for each investment property I have. Now, this is just to cover any rare expenses that may pop up, and there's also a side there just in case I need to draw onto it if something were to happen within my personal life. So I keep it there mainly for the properties, but I'm essentially just waiting for that event to happen. And if it doesn't, it's a shame because I'm not earning a return on that. However, if during my general day-to-day life, all of a sudden I need to pay for an emergency surgery or, fix something up in one of my rental properties, or if I have to pay for that repair in my rental house, if I've caused damage or something, then I'm able to actually immediately pay for that with the 5,000 I've set aside for each of my properties. And then all I need to do is save that up as fast as possible again. So the next place you can store an emergency fund, okay, is in other liquid assets. So there are micro investing platforms and other sort of small investment apps out there where you can essentially have money just automatically transfer out of your account, and it earns a fairly large interest rate because it invests into shares. So for example, Raise, whilst this charges a small fee, the return you generally make off it is better than what that fee is, okay? And it's actually yielding slightly higher than what a high interest savings account is. If you happen to be doing this through a low cycle in the market, you could also make greater returns than what the typical average would be. So using a platform like Raise, and you can find a referral link in the description below, this is going to be another great place to park some funds. If you ever need to withdraw some of that money to pay for that expense, the whole time it's been sitting there, it's been earning market returns, dividends are automatically reinvested, and because it is a managed investment vehicle, you don't need to do any rebalancing. This is automatically done with every transfer of money that comes out of your personal spending account and lands into your Raise investing account. Now, there are other micro investing apps which essentially do the same thing, but I find this one is an extremely easy, low risk and low stress way to also have an emergency fund. It's liquid enough that we could draw down on it within the week, because by the time you sell and then transfer it back to your bank account, it takes a couple days. But if you don't need to use it, you're at least earning returns that are not negligible compared to what inflation is. On my Raise account last year, it was very much a rare event for this to happen, but because I started it during a downward turn in the market, I've earned up to 26% back on my Raise account, which is phenomenal. But this is simply only because of the rare timing of the market and when I got started. If you were just investing all the time and we did it long term and we balanced out the average returns of the market, you should in theory be yielding about 8% back to you. But then of course your fees are an expense you need to account for. However, because we're not having to make individual purchases and there's no brokerage fees, those fees you pay just for having that investment vehicle sort of do balance out, because you're not required to pay brokerage to enter the market. You simply have money land in your account, it's invested on your behalf, and then you receive all of the dividends reinvested, etc., back into your account. It rebalances automatically and it's extremely low stress. So an investment platform like Raise or Spaceship or Bamboo can be another fantastic place for you to just simply start building a little emergency fund. And because you're investing that money straight away, it counts as a dollar cost averaging strategy for building your emergency fund. So I like to think of this as another fun way to actually build your emergency fund. But if you don't need to actually access it super regularly, you're going to earn a return back that's far outweighing what you'll get from a high interest savings account, your offset account, etc. Now, in the event that our 3 to 6 months of emergency funds doesn't cover that big expense, we can then look at drawing down on our portfolio. But for myself, I don't wish to do this, okay? However, I don't wish to miss out on market returns by leaving most of my money in cash. So I have just enough cash to cover my basic living expenses. Most of the time I live in poverty as a result, and then that allows me to simply keep most of my remaining cash invested in the market or in another investment platform of sorts, aside from the emergency money I leave for my properties. If I ever do encounter some hardships, I can simply sell down some of my investment portfolio in order to retrieve those funds, which I can then use to cover that emergency. However, if I had to wait 20 years for that to occur, at least my money is earning a return in the meantime. Where I can earn 8% in the market, but 1% in a high interest savings account, I know what I would definitely prefer. So guys, I hope in this video you've learned a little bit of an insight as to what an emergency fund is, what you can use it for, and where you may like to store it. That way you can access it when is required, and you're not stressing yourself out by leaving such a large portion of your emergency fund in cash. Although it is not ideal to have to sell down some of your investment portfolio to cover an expense, that's far better than going into bankruptcy or becoming homeless simply because you could not afford it whatsoever. So by investing slightly more of that cash reserve you had, let's say you kept that 1 month to 6 weeks living expenses like I said, but then you have the ability to draw down on annual leave, credit lines, or sell investments, I think you'll be completely fine in the future. Guys, thank you for watching this today. If you got any value from this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.